Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. You won't believe what just happened at the US Congress this morning during a live broadcast of a hearing. Jasmine Crockett suddenly interrupted Karoline Leavitt in an atmosphere as tense as a taut wire. But what no one expected was Karoline's response. No anger, no argument, just a single icy reply that instantly turned the tables, leaving the entire room holding its breath before diving into the story comment, where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The atmosphere in the House Oversight Committee hearing was heavy tense, like the calm before a major storm. Congress members kept shifting seats. Aides whispered behind stacks of open documents, their eyes scanning nameplates with scrutiny and caution. Everyone could sense a wave was about to crash, though no one knew exactly when C-SPAN broadcasted live drawing. Millions of viewers nationwide, from people sipping morning coffee to reporters on edge to Americans trying to make sense of the deepening turmoil their country faced. Representative Karoline Leavitt, a Republican, was speaking with confidence and sharpness, dissecting loopholes in campaign finance policy. Suddenly, from 2 seats away, Democratic Representative Jasmine Crockett cut in. "Sit down, girl, don't embarrass yourself further." The words landed like a punch, reverberating through the room. It wasn't just the words, but Jasmine's glaring eyes and tightly pursed lips, a clear display of contempt, as if Karoline didn't belong at that podium. The term girl carried a historical weight, touching wounds that have never fully healed, despite both women being dressed in crisp suits and seated behind microphones. The room didn't erupt. It froze for 3 or 4 seconds. Everything seemed to pause. A male congressman in the back looked up from his papers. An aide blinked in confusion. The stenographer hesitated over the keyboard. Viewers in front of their screens fell silent, some rewinding the broadcast, others whispering in disbelief. What did she just say? Karoline didn't flinch. Not a furrowed brow, not a wavering glance, just steady. Even breaths. Her left hand gently set down a sheet of paper. Her icy gaze locked on Jasmine. Unwavering for a split second, the camera captured the moment perfectly, one trying to belittle her opponent, the other standing resolute, unshaken before she spoke. The silence seemed to ask, "Did everyone hear that?" Then Karoline spoke, just one sentence, but enough to flip the entire room's dynamic. "I was elected to represent my district, my values, and every woman who's been told to shrink herself to please others." Her voice wasn't shrill or harsh, but her words carried a power the microphone could barely capture. A faint sigh came from someone nearby, as if they just witnessed a deft dodge and a clean counterstrike without a single swing. Jasmine blinked, as if wondering if she'd gone too far. She leaned back, pretending to brush an invisible speck of dust off her jacket, trying to maintain composure. But the room's energy had shifted. Scattered applause broke out. Not thunderous, but slow, meaningful clap, spreading from one seat to another. An older Democratic congressman from Idaho tapped his fingers lightly on the table, his face expressionless outside the room. Social media exploded. Phones buzzed nonstop, screenshots spread like wildfire. A short clip posted with the caption, "Jasmine Crockett told Rep. Karoline Leavitt to sit down, girl," and instantly paid the price. News channels scrambled, abandoning old scripts as anchors pushed fresh reports across desks. And Karoline, she didn't smile or gloat, just quietly returned to her notes and said, "Now I'd like to continue." After that moment, the hearing almost lost its focus. No one was talking about campaign finance issues anymore. Instead, every conversation revolved around tone, respect, and the meaning of one powerful woman trying to diminish another with just 3 words. But this wasn't the end of the matter. It was only the beginning of something bigger. The cameras kept rolling. Most people thought it was just a fleeting, explosive moment, a viral clip, a hot headline for the next 24 hours. But what Karoline Leavitt did next showed she wasn't about to let it stop there. She was turning it into something more profound in the hearing room. Things tried to return to normal. The chair lightly tapped the gavel, calling for order and redirecting the discussion. But the attention had shifted entirely to Karoline. Her voice, her demeanor, and the way she didn't let that insult shake her resolve. There was something different, powerful, radiating even through the screens. Jasmine Crockett sat back, lips pressed tight. She tried to appear unaffected, even bored, but her hands under the table kept moving. Karoline didn't mention her again, nor did she need to. Every word she spoke afterward carried an unspoken message. "You can't make me small." In the audience section, a college intern named Sofia Martinez, seated behind the press row, scribbled furiously in her notebook. She texted her roommate, "Did you hear what Karoline just said? Gave me chills." Sofia wasn't alone. Dozens of online viewers began quoting Karoline's response in comments, captions, and social media posts. By late afternoon, the C-SPAN clip of the hearing had racked up over 800,000 views in just a few hours. But it wasn't the budget charts or policy debates drawing viewers. It was the 35-second video, capturing Karoline's poised, powerful, and precise reaction. News channels played the clip on loop on MSNBC. A panel dissected the discriminatory undertones of the exchange. One commentator was blunt. "Don't pretend that remark was harmless. It was a power play, and Karoline dismantled it with dignity." Even CNN's neutral coverage remarked, calling her response a masterclass in handling pressure without losing composure. But it wasn't just political pundits who felt it. It was ordinary people, those with jobs, kids' bills, and exhaustion, who saw something familiar in Karoline's gaze. A teacher in Boise posted, "I've been sit-down girl in meetings, classes, workshops. Her response hit me hard." That's how you answer back. A grandmother in Oklahoma shared on Facebook, "My mother couldn't speak up like that. I'm proud Karoline Leavitt did." This wasn't the kind of drama that flares up and fades. It was a quiet but persistent resonance etched into people's hearts by day's end. Karoline's press secretary, Ethan Brooks, sat at his desk scrolling through a flood of interview requests, local radio morning shows, podcasts hosted by Black creators, all wanting to hear from her. Karoline didn't rush to speak. She let the moment settle, letting the public process what had happened in the office. Her team gathered. Privately, window blinds, half-drawn footsteps echoing from the hallway. Staff stood there, still stunned by what they'd witnessed. Ethan broke the silence. "You okay?" Karoline, still standing, looked at him and said, "I'm fine, but don't think I didn't catch every detail of that performance. It wasn't just aimed at me. It was a show for anyone standing behind her." Another aide. Riley nodded slowly. "Calls coming in from Essence, the Breakfast Club, even Jon Stewart's team." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Jon Stewart's still doing a show?" "No," Riley laughed, "but they're doing political segments with guests." Karoline turned to the window, gazing at the street. "Let them wait. I'll speak. But when I do, I want to talk to the people who needed to hear today, not for applause, not for a soundbite, but for the girls like me and others who've been silenced by that tone." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett issued a brief statement through her communications director, calling the public's reaction overblown and urging people to move forward, focus on policy. The statement fell flat, ignored by most that evening at a community event in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Karoline Leavitt kept her promise to attend a scholarship ceremony for high school seniors. After the event, a young girl approached her. "My grandma called me crying today. She said she never thought she'd see someone respond like that. Not yelling, not backing down, just calm, full of confidence." Karoline placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, smiling. "You don't always have to be calm. What matters is knowing when not to let someone steal your strength." Those words spread quickly. People started calling it the Leavitt Declaration, but the reverberations didn't fade. They only grew louder, and the wave of attention was just beginning to swell. As the sun set in San Diego, the clip had exploded across the internet. Millions had watched, and unlike most political headlines, this moment needed little explanation. You heard it, you saw it, you felt it, and the internet did too on TikTok. Edited versions of the clip were set to every sound, imaginable rap, gospel choirs, bursting fireworks. One creator slowed down Karoline's response, adding a caption, "This is how a woman who knows her power moves." That version alone garnered over 2 million views. By midnight, a cartoonist in Nevada sketched the scene, Karoline at the mic poised and regal, while Jasmine tangled in her own microphone cord. The caption read, "When you try to silence someone, but only make their voice louder." It began trending, two phrases, one moment, 1,000 meanings, One side celebrated quiet strength. The other recalled every time someone tried to diminish another in a split second, and people were talking. Long thread posts emerged, with users sharing their own experiences at meetings, family gatherings, PTA events, job interviews. Times they were interrupted, mocked, called girl by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. One woman wrote, "I'm 45 with 2 degrees, my own company, and a mortgage. Yet last week, a man I'd never met called me girl. While I was explaining data, he didn't understand Caroline's face in that hearing. That's me, that's all of us." Soon, celebrities chimed in. Kerry Washington quoted Caroline, "I was elected to stand up." The post got over 100,000 likes. Shonda Rhimes shared the clip with a single word, dignity. But what pushed the moment beyond a viral blip was the response from ordinary people. Moms, students, veterans, office workers, factory employees, pastors. They didn't share for the drama, they shared because it voiced something they'd never put into words. Even outlets that usually skipped congressional hearings couldn't ignore it. BuzzFeed ran a piece titled "Karoline Leavitt just gave a master class in holding power without losing cool." The cut called it the most powerful 2 seconds in politics this year in Washington. D.C. Caroline's team was caught off guard. By the speed of the spread, the digital communications crew had to triple their capacity to handle messages. Some were from the press, but most weren't. People wrote letters just to say thank you. A woman from Columbus said she hadn't watched news in 2 years, but her daughter showed her the clip, and she cried. A retired Navy officer wrote, "Ma'am, I don't agree with your politics, but I respect what you did. You didn't make a scene. You just stood firm. That matters, of course." Not all feedback was positive. That's the internet. There were critics, pundits trying to spin the story down, play its significance, or shift focus. Some called it a misunderstanding or political theater, but that only added fuel to the fire. People knew what they saw. No explanation needed, it was recognition. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett posted a photo the next morning, smiling on the Capitol steps, captioned, "About fighting for freedom." The comments below were unrelenting, not mindless attacks, but sharp questions she couldn't easily answer. Still think calling a grown woman girl was a good idea? Was that supposed to be friendly? Or did you just think no one would call you out? Jasmine stayed silent. The damage wasn't in what she said, it was in what it revealed. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt still hadn't done a single interview, held a press conference, or launched a flashy media campaign. She let social media tell the story that evening. She went to Atlanta, attending a community meeting she'd promised to join months earlier. A small room, about 40 folding chairs, mostly older women and local organizers. When she walked in, the room stood and clapped. One woman rose, voice trembling. "We saw what you did, and ma'am, you did it for all of us." Caroline smiled softly, replying, "I did it because I had to." But while social media buzzed, another conversation had quietly begun, deeper than likes or shares beneath the spotlight. Beyond the viral quotes and edited clips, Karoline Leavitt was just a girl from Memphis, Tennessee, with a radiant smile, innate resilience, and a voice that refused to be silenced. Her mother, Evelyn, was a nurse, not the half-hearted kind. She worked double shifts most weekends at Methodist Hospital, raised 3 kids, and still found time to protest when she saw injustice. Her father, Marcus, was quieter, a union worker with a dry sense of humor and callous hands. He rarely talked politics, but always knew who was doing honest work and who deserved better pay. Carolyn grew up in a family that wasn't rich or connected, but they were clear about values, about dignity, about why you speak up when someone's being trampled, even if it's not you in high school. Caroline was the girl who asked too many questions, not to be annoying, but the why is the dress code stricter for girls. Kind teachers either loved or feared her. Sometimes both. At Spelman College, she majored in political science and waited tables on weekends once she lost points for disrupting class after debating a professor on voter suppression data. She didn't care. She kept the documents and pinned them to the student union bulletin board. She started showing up at city council meetings, not for attention, but to hold people accountable. Then one day someone said, "What everyone was thinking, you should run." She laughed at first, but the idea stuck when she ran for the Georgia House. She won with over 50% of the vote, a tight race, a grueling campaign. A few donors pulled out midway, thinking she was too blunt, too urban, too unapologetic. She sent them thank you cards after winning the hearing. Wasn't the first time Karoline faced disrespect, but it was the first time the nation saw how she responded in Atlanta after the community meeting. A local event organizer, Miss Clara, took her hand. "You made us proud," she said. Karoline nodded, her gaze steady. "I did it for people like you who taught me how to stand tall." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett kept trying to salvage her image. She appeared at an event in Virginia emphasizing policy priorities, but the public's eyes stayed on Karoline. Some of Jasmine's congressional colleagues began keeping their distance, not wanting to be tied to the controversy. A few others, especially female lawmakers, quietly texted Karoline, praising how she handled it online. The wave of support for Karoline kept growing. A group of young women in Chicago launched a social media campaign called Stand Like Karoline, urging women to share their stories of overcoming insults. A high school in Miami invited Karoline to speak, hoping she'd inspire students she hadn't accepted yet, but her team noted every invitation, knowing this wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. Karoline kept her work rhythm, not letting the spotlight derail her. She knew the power of this moment wasn't in views or hashtags, but in the lasting change it could spark. She began drafting a new proposal focused on gender equity education in schools, inspired by the stories people sent her. "If we teach kids respect early," she told Ethan, "maybe fewer adults will think they can call someone girl without consequences." Karoline Leavitt never forgot her roots. On her desk, she kept a small frame photo, Evelyn in her nurse's uniform, holding baby Karoline, both beaming over something, just out of frame on tough days. Karoline looked at it and remembered why she was here when Jasmine Crockett told her to sit down. It wasn't just an insult, it was the memory of hundreds of moments she'd been told she was too loud, too overbearing, too angry. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt still hadn't done a single interview, held a press conference, or launched a flashy media campaign. She let social media tell the story that evening. She went to Atlanta, attending a community meeting she'd promised to join months earlier, a small room, about 40 folding chairs, mostly older women and local organizers. When she walked in, the room stood and clapped. One woman rose, voice trembling. "We saw what you did, and ma'am, you did it for all of us." Karoline smiled softly, replying, "I did it because I had to." But while social media buzzed, another conversation had quietly begun, deeper than likes or shares, beneath the spotlight, beyond the viral quotes and edited clips. Karoline Leavitt was just a girl from Memphis, Tennessee, with a radiant smile, innate resilience, and a voice that refused to be silenced. Her mother, Evelyn, was a nurse, not the half-hearted kind. She worked double shifts most weekends at Methodist Hospital, raised 3 kids, and still found time to protest when she saw injustice. Her father, Marcus, was quieter, a union worker with a dry sense of humor and callous hands. He rarely talked politics, but always knew who was doing honest work and who deserved better pay. Karoline grew up in a family that wasn't rich or connected, but they were clear about values, about dignity, about why you speak up when someone's being trampled, even if it's not you. In high school, Karoline was the girl who asked too many questions, not to be annoying, but the why. Is the dress code stricter for girls? Kind teachers either loved or feared her. Sometimes both. At Spelman College, she majored in political science and waited tables on weekends. Once she lost points for disrupting class. After debating a professor on voter suppression data, she didn't care. She kept the documents and pinned them to the student union bulletin board. She started showing up at city council meetings, not for attention, but to hold people accountable. Then one day someone said what everyone was thinking: "You should run." She laughed at first, but the idea stuck. When she ran for the Georgia House, she won with over 50% of the vote. A tight race, a grueling campaign. A few donors pulled out midway, thinking she was too blunt, too urban, too unapologetic. She sent them thank you cards after winning the hearing. Wasn't the first time Karoline faced disrespect, but it was the first time the nation saw how she responded in Atlanta after the community meeting. A local event organizer, Miss Clara, took her hand. "You made us proud," she said. Karoline nodded, her gaze steady. "I did it for people like you who taught me how to stand tall." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett kept trying to salvage her image. She appeared at an event in Virginia emphasizing policy priorities, but the public's eyes stayed on Karoline. Some of Jasmine's congressional colleagues began keeping their distance, not wanting to be tied to the controversy. A few others, especially female lawmakers, quietly texted Karoline, praising how she handled it online. The wave of support for Karoline kept growing. A group of young women in Chicago launched a social media campaign called Stand Like Karoline, urging women to share their stories of overcoming insults. A high school in Miami invited Karoline to speak, hoping she'd inspire students she hadn't accepted yet. But her team noted every invitation, knowing this wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. Karoline kept her work rhythm, not letting the spotlight derail her. She knew the power of this moment wasn't in views or hashtags, but in the lasting change it could spark. She began drafting a new proposal focused on gender equity education in schools, inspired by the stories people sent her. If we teach kids respect early, she told Ethan, maybe fewer adults will think they can call someone girl without consequences. Karoline Leavitt never forgot her roots on her desk. She kept a small frame photo of Evelyn in her nurse's uniform holding baby Karoline, both beaming over something just out of frame. On tough days, Karoline looked at it and remembered why she was here. When Jasmine Crockett told her to sit down, it wasn't just an insult. It was the memory of hundreds of moments she'd been told she was too loud, too overbearing, too angry, too blunt, too hard to control. It was a reminder that some still mistake confidence for arrogance, especially in a black woman's voice. But Karoline knew those rooms. She wasn't new to them. She was raised in them. Karoline knew who she was, and those who'd underestimated her were only starting to realize it. In Congress, it was about to feel the shift the next morning. Capitol Hill was abuzz, but not over. Any bill producers scrambled behind studio sets. Morning hosts skipped routine economic stats. Everyone wanted to know, would Karoline Leavitt speak publicly? With Jasmine Crockett clarify, double down, or retract, MSNBC debuted a segment called The Power of Poise. Fox News called it overblown congressional outrage. CNN brought in a panel of analysts, each carefully phrasing the same point. This doesn't look good for Jasmine. Karoline stayed silent. No press conferences, no live streams, no fanfare. Her office released only a brief statement, more like a handwritten note than a press release. My words yesterday weren't rehearsed, they reflect experiences. Many women, especially women of color, have lived their whole lives. I'll always speak up for my district and for dignity. No attacks, no politics, just clarity. And that clarity rang louder than any noise by noon. The White House press secretary called it an unfortunate exchange and praised Karoline's professionalism. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's office struggled. A leaked internal memo revealed advisors urging her to call the remark a joke or offer a soft apology, but Jasmine refused. Pride won out. A close ally, Representative Tyler Grayson, tried to shift the narrative in a radio interview, calling the incident a distraction, but the host wasn't buying it. The public didn't let it go. Jasmine posted about energy prices, shared photos with veterans captioned vaguely, "We stay resilient." But every comment circled back to one phrase. It's not about resilience, it's about listening, and the worst part is silence from her longtime supporters. The clip, when rewatched, only looked worse. Meanwhile, Karoline didn't need to respond. She didn't need defending either, and her allies knew it. A few, usually quiet, sent private messages. Like a voicemail from Representative Calvin Porter. "You handled that with grace. We saw it's not just about you. It's about all of us," her communications aide. Riley was sifting through dozens of interview requests. "NPR wants you in studio," she said. Karoline just shook her head. Not yet. She let the story spread on its own, but as her name climbed, trending lists, invitations poured in. The View, CBS Sunday Morning, PBS NewsHour, Morehouse. Each wanted a piece of the story. Gender, race, or political civility in a cluttered meeting room. Karoline crossed her arms before her team. "Everyone wants a headline, but if we speak, it'll be on our terms." Meanwhile, Jasmine kept grappling with the fallout. She tried appearing at public events, but the public's gaze stayed on Karoline. Some colleagues began avoiding Jasmine, wary of being tainted by the controversy, but Karoline didn't pause to gloat. She kept meeting voters, hearing their stories. At a workshop in Birmingham, Alabama, an older woman shared, "I was called girl when I was 50. Seeing you that day, I saw myself." Karoline nodded, replying, "Stories like yours are why I stood up." The support for Karoline wasn't just an online phenomenon, it became a real movement. A group of students in Philadelphia held a Stand Like Karoline workshop, encouraging young women to share experiences of overcoming disrespect. A teacher in Denver used the clip in class to teach self-respect. Caroline received hundreds of letters from kids scrolled thank yous to elders' tales of their journeys. She read everyone keeping some in a wooden box on her desk. She also began working with other lawmakers to push a bill on gender equity education, emphasizing teaching kids respect early. If we change how kids see others' worth, she told Riley, we'll change how adults behave. Jasmine, though not publicly, admitting fault quietly shifted her tone, avoiding inflammatory language. Ethan nodded. So what's the plan? Caroline stepped to the window looking out at Constitution Avenue. We wait. Then we talk to the people who've lived this. No performing for ratings, we let the message land. The team agreed, but pressure was mounting. The media didn't like waiting, and Jasmine Crockett's silence wasn't helping her case. Some conservative outlets began distancing themselves. One op-ed called the incident a self-inflicted cultural misstep. Conservative outlets began distancing themselves. One op-ed called the incident a self-inflicted cultural misstep. Another asked, what happens when performative toughness reveals real insecurity? In Georgia, Karoline Leavitt's office started receiving flowers, handwritten notes, even a USB from a high school debate coach labeled "Stand Like Karoline." Even political rivals tread carefully. They knew this was no longer just a verbal clash, but a moment showing what happens when you try to diminish someone who knows their worth. 3 days after the hearing, Karoline kept a prior commitment, speaking to a group of girls at a leadership program in Montgomery, Alabama. No cameras, no stage, just a small gym, a microphone, and girls eager to see what the woman who stayed calm was like in person. Karoline dressed simply, sweater jeans, low heels. She belonged in that room not as a politician, but as someone who'd lived it. When she said that I wasn't stunned by shock, Karoline began, but because I'd heard it my whole life, she shared stories of being dismissed for being too strong, too blunt, and how staying calm wasn't weakness, but strength. When a girl asked if it hurt, Karoline replied, no, because she wasn't talking to me, she was talking to her idea of me. No prepared speech, just honest talk about being mistaken for an aide despite wearing a congressional pin, and how she learned sometimes silence is power. You speak when it matters after the talk. The girls crowded around sharing dreams. One wanted to be a lawyer. Another was running for student council. President Karoline listened to each as if they were future leaders because she believed they were. Meanwhile, in Washington, Jasmine Crockett faced mounting pressure. Some allies began criticizing her publicly. She appeared on a talk show emphasizing policy achievements, but questions about Karoline persisted. She called it a misunderstood moment. The audience remained unconvinced. Karoline didn't clap back. Instead, she channeled the momentum, partnering with nonprofits to expand girls' leadership programs, hosting online workshops, uniting thousands of women across America. She also received an invitation to an international women's rights conference where she planned to speak on the importance of gender equity education. We don't just teach kids to read and write, she told Riley in a team meeting. We have to teach them how to see others' worth. The Stand Like Karoline movement kept spreading. Schools across America began weaving her story into lessons on self-respect and leadership. A group of women in Los Angeles started a scholarship in her name, supporting girls pursuing law or politics. Karoline didn't seek the spotlight, but she knew how to use it for change. Jasmine, though still in office, couldn't regain her former trust. She gradually withdrew from public events, focusing on legislative work quietly. Some thought she was biding her time for a comeback, but others believed that moment changed her, forcing her to rethink how she communicates after the talk. An elderly woman named Ruth, a volunteer mentor in the program, pulled Karoline aside. I've done this for 30 years, she said, and I've never seen those girls sit so still. You gave them something we couldn't. You showed them how to hold their ground without bending. Karoline gripped her hand tightly. It's the only way I know that night, grainy. But authentic clips from Karoline's talk spread rapidly on Instagram. TikTok, no polish, no staging, just real moments. One commenter wrote, she's not speaking from a pedestal, she's speaking like she's lived it. Karoline's comms team didn't need to post anything. The moment spread itself. But behind the scenes, Washington began to shift. The Congressional Black Caucus reached out with support. A senator from Arizona called Karoline, saying, I didn't grasp how deep this was until I saw you talk to those girls. The power now wasn't in the viral clip, but in the authenticity beyond the lights in small rooms. No mics, but full of impact. 3 days later, in a closed meeting room on Capitol Hill, 4 lawmakers, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans sat together. Representative Amos Carver from Wyoming said bluntly that clip's not going away. No one disagreed. They'd seen the public's reaction and knew this moment. No one disagreed. They'd seen the public's reaction and knew this moment was quietly shaping the political landscape that afternoon. Back at her office, Caroline's aide Riley walked in. "You won't believe this. Jasmine's office wants a private meeting." "No press." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "She's trying to save face." Riley replied, "Maybe someone just told her this will stick longer than she thought." Karoline thought for a moment. "Fine, but she comes here." 3 hours later, Jasmine Crockett walked into Karoline's office alone. No aides, no cameras. Karoline sat calmly behind her desk. Jasmine began, "I'm not here to argue, I want to explain." Karoline gestured to the chair across from her, then explained the air was heavy, but not hostile. Jasmine spoke about pressure, expectations, and why she acted that way. She didn't apologize, but admitted her tone was wrong. Karoline listened. No interruptions, no sharp reactions. The conversation didn't resolve everything, but it was a start between 2 people who understood that despite differing views, they were navigating the same political reality where every word leaves an echo. Karoline stayed silent for a moment, then responded, "I don't care about intent, I care about impact. Your words didn't just target me, they targeted every woman who's been called that, and you knew it." Jasmine nodded slowly, not arguing. "I get it," she said. "I'm not here to fix everything right now, but I want to start somewhere." Jasmine Crockett sat down. She looked uncomfortable, not nervous. Just unaccustomed to this, she took a deep breath. "I said something I shouldn't have. It came out wrong." Karoline Leavitt tilted her head. "It didn't just come out, it came from somewhere. There's a difference." Jasmine started to respond, but stopped. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "So what did you mean?" Karoline asked, voice steady. A long pause followed. Finally, Jasmine said, "I wanted to make a point you were interrupting." "I had the floor." Karoline nodded. "Jasmine," she said, leaning forward slightly, "it was dismissive, not just to me, but to every woman who's been silenced in a room where they belong that night." The clip of Karoline's talk spread like wildfire online. Unstaged, just blurry phone footage, but real viewers felt something different. She doesn't talk like a politician. She talks like she's lived it. Karoline's office didn't repost anything they didn't need to. The moment spread itself in Washington. Quiet conversations began. The Congressional Black Caucus offered support. A senator from Arizona admitted, "I didn't realize the impact until I saw you talk to those girls." In Congress, lawmakers discussed privately. This moment wasn't fading that afternoon. Karoline's office got an unexpected call from Jasmine Crockett's team. She wanted a private meeting, no press. Karoline agreed on the condition that Jasmine come to her office 3 hours later. Jasmine walked in. No aides, no cameras. Karoline was composed. "I'm not asking for an apology. I want you to think about it. This job isn't a TV show. People listen." Jasmine paused, then replied, "I get it now." When Jasmine left, no handshake. Karoline only said to her press secretary, "She's shaken, but that's not my problem anymore." No press release followed, but in the next hearing, Jasmine didn't interrupt. She stayed quieter. Change had begun, Karoline. Meanwhile, prepared to move forward, her team brainstormed, drafting a formal resolution on respect in political spaces, especially for women of color, not just to address one moment, but to lay the groundwork for real change. The resolution proposed new codes of conduct and mandatory training on multicultural communication and gender equity. Jasmine tried to rebuild her image, but public sentiment had shifted. A Democratic congressman privately messaged Karoline, "You did what many wanted to, but didn't. Dare thank you." Karoline didn't rest on her laurels. She met voters, listened, inspired in Savannah. A mother said, "My daughter watches your clip every day. She wants to be strong like you without shouting." The Stand Like Karoline movement grew. Schools invited her to speak. Women's rights groups partnered with her. A podcast inspired by her launched, discussing how women reclaim their voice in spaces where they've been dismissed. Karoline also pushed forward the gender equity education bill. She had begun drafting. She worked with bipartisan lawmakers, emphasizing that education is not just about knowledge, but values. "If we don't teach kids respect," she said in a hearing, We're leaving another generation to fix our mistakes one evening in Atlanta after a long day of meetings. Karoline sat alone in her office looking at the framed photo of her mother. She thought about her journey from the girl in Memphis who asked too many questions to the woman changing how Congress views dignity. She knew the road was long, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Girls like Aaliyah, Tiana, and Maya, the ones she met in Montgomery, would carry that torch forward. They called it the Dignity and Respect in Public Service Resolution. 2 weeks later, when Karoline Leavitt presented it on the House floor, the chamber was unusually packed. Cameras rolled, phones were raised, but Karoline didn't perform. She didn't dramatize. She just read the text, clear, concise, unapologetic. This resolution isn't a reprimand. She said it's a mirror one. We all need to look into. The resolution called for professional standards in verbal communication. Especially in hearings, it acknowledged the painful history of dismissive language targeting women of color, and it urged Congress to lead by example, not just in policy, but in conduct. As Karoline spoke, reactions were mixed, some skeptical, but others nodded quietly when she finished. Applause broke out. Not thunderous, but sincere, though no one expected the resolution to pass immediately. It cleared the committee stage with bipartisan support, sparking vital discussions that evening. Karoline sat alone in her hotel, calling her mother. I saw every second. Her mother said it was like thunder. In the following days, her office received over 8,000 emails, mostly from young women, thanking her and wanting to act. One student wrote, I want to be strong like you, but not rude. At a panel discussion, when asked if that moment sparked change, Karoline replied, I think it woke people up, and once awake, you can't put them back to sleep. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her approach, speaking more carefully, focusing on policy, and working with advisors to rebuild her image, though some noted the shift lost. Trust was hard to regain. The Stand Like Karoline movement grew, organizations supporting young women emerged, and her story was woven into curricula. Karoline kept engaging communities and pushing the gender equity education bill. She said education is teaching kids to value others. Though not directly involved in the resolution, Jasmine quietly backed similar initiatives. Some acknowledged her efforts, but skepticism lingered. Karoline didn't dwell on Jasmine's actions. She focused on her work, from refining the resolution to supporting community programs. She received an invitation to an international women's rights conference in London, where she planned to share how small moments can lead to big change. Every step forward starts with someone standing up, she told Ethan while preparing her speech one evening in Atlanta. Karoline sat in her office reading a letter from a 15-year-old girl in Birmingham. I used to think I wasn't good enough to speak up, the girl wrote, but you made me believe I can. Karoline smiled, placing the letter in the wooden box on her desk next to her mother's framed photo. She knew her journey wasn't just about a resolution or a movement. It was about empowering girls like that one to write their own stories. But the truth is, the real impact isn't seen right away. Not in headlines, but in hearts. And one place was about to prove that vividly. 6 months later, on a cold morning in Columbus, Georgia, a public school called Riverfront Academy held a debate presentation in its multi-purpose room, plastic chairs, folding tables, a podium borrowed from the local community center, nothing fancy but for the students. It wasn't just a school event. It was the day they got to speak their truth. The topic was power and presence, how we use our voice. Nya Carter, 13, adjusted her glasses, stepped to the mic with a folded speech in hand, and paused before starting. She looked nervous, but when she spoke, she did so with a fire that stunned the room. I was chosen to represent my values, my community, and every girl who's been told to shrink herself to make others comfortable. When Nia quoted Karoline's house floor speech, teachers clapped through tears. Nia said, I don't want to shout to be heard. I just want my voice to matter. Karoline didn't know about that speech, but that's the magic of legacy. It echoes in places she's never been in Washington. Karoline continued working quietly. Her resolution didn't pass in full, but it prompted committees to review their operations. Some chairs paid closer attention to tone, and meetings added conduct. Guidelines change came slowly, but it was real. Karoline still worked late. Met voters, read briefs, not for fame, but for duty. But what had shifted was how other women saw her and themselves. A young staffer said, I wore my natural hair today because of you. A Republican aide admitted her boss changed how he communicated Because of her, Jasmine Crockett never apologized, but she never used that tone again. Whether out of regret or politics, it didn't matter. The line had been drawn one day at the airport. A woman who once disagreed with Karoline stopped her. "How you handled that made me rethink what real strength is." Later, Karoline scribbled on a napkin, "Rethink what strength is." That was her legacy. Not the clapback, but a new model of power. Calm, steady, no need for show. She kept hosting workshops, listening to communities. A girl once afraid of being too strong said, "You made me see that's a good thing." The Stand Like Karoline movement spread from Chicago classrooms to Denver scholarships. Thank you letters kept coming. Jasmine slowly regained some credibility, focusing on housing policy and learning to collaborate rather than confront. Karoline didn't care much about Jasmine's journey. She was busy refining the education bill, pushing girls' leadership programs, and preparing for the London conference. "We're not just changing laws," she told Ethan. "We're changing how people see each other." One evening, in her Atlanta office, Karoline read a letter from Naya, the girl from Columbus. "I won my debate because of you." She wrote, "I didn't shout, but they still listened." Karoline smiled, placing the letter in the wooden box by her mother's framed photo. She knew her legacy wasn't just a resolution or movement. It was girls like Naya learning to stand up without asking permission when the next congressional session began. Karoline Leavitt co-sponsored 3 new bills on education, maternal health care access, and housing equity. She didn't ride the wave of public attention. She wanted to build something more lasting than applause at a community panel in Mobile, Alabama. Someone asked if she felt her moment had passed. She smiled, replying, "Moments pass. Movements don't. If I leave behind one sentence that makes someone stand taller, I've done my job." But before the story closed, Karoline wanted to leave one more message, a note for anyone ever told to sit down when they should stand up. Karoline stood alone on the stage of a local hall in Augusta, Georgia. No press, no crew, just a wooden podium, rows of folding chairs, and people from the community: barbers, retired teachers, single moms, volunteers, students, pastors. This was a town hall, not a headline. She adjusted the mic slightly, looking out at the crowd. "Let me tell you why I keep showing up," she began, "because one sentence can shift a room, but showing up again and again, that's what changes the world." A few nodded. An elderly woman in the back whispered to her granddaughter, "Listen close." Karoline went on, her voice calm but full. What happened that day wasn't just about one woman being disrespected. It was about a culture that teaches us who's worthy of respect, who should be ignored, and who's supposed to be silenced. She paused. "I wasn't surprised by what was said to me, but I was done letting it slide. And I think a lot of you are too." The room was quiet, not tense, but shared, because nearly everyone there had their own version of that moment, a time they were told to stay in their place, lower their voice, be agreeable, or not make a fuss. Karoline looked up. "I was referring to every venue when I stated I was elected to stand up, not just Congress. That attempts to reduce the size of every boardroom, waiting room, dinner table, and classroom." She turned on her heel a little. When a woman, particularly a woman of color, refuses to make herself, do you ever notice how uneasy the world becomes? It is their responsibility to receive applause, not yours, to ease that uneasiness. Broke out, she waited, and then remarked, "It's okay if some of you never run for office. However, I can assure you that your voice counts at the polling station, at home, at work, and at your children's school." A 20-something woman with a notebook on her lap raised her hand near the front row and said, "How do you keep speaking when people are constantly attempting to silence you?" She said, "You remember who you are," as Karoline gave her a gentle grin. "Prior to them telling you to be quiet." The crowd murmured in agreement. She continued, "I'm not perfect, I'm not a saint, but I know why I'm here. And I know every time I choose to speak without shouting, stand without performing, respond without apologizing for existing, that's a win." She let the silence linger. No one reached for their phone. No one wanted to miss it. "Some people still think power is just about volume," she said, "but I've learned something different. Real power is knowing when to speak, what to say, then standing still to let it echo." Then one final line: if you're hearing this and you've ever been told to sit down when you knew you were right to stand, don't forget you weren't sent here to be silent. You were sent to make a difference. Act like it. The room erupted in applause. Not just proud, but energized after the meeting, people crowded around Caroline sharing their stories. A mother spoke of her daughter now running for student council. An elderly man said he'd started attending city council meetings because of her. Caroline listened mentally, noting each story like fuel for the journey ahead. The crowd stood no music, no drama, just raw human response after the event. Karoline Leavitt didn't linger long. She shook a few hands, gave a few hugs, took a couple of photos, then slipped out the back door to the street where her car waited. The night was cool, the streets quiet before getting in. She pulled out her phone, typing into her notes app. One sentence can go viral, but one stand that's forever. Caroline drove off, streetlights flashing by. She thought of the faces in the hall, those who nodded, who whispered in solidarity. They didn't just hear, they felt it. This moment wasn't about her, but about them. People learning to stand tall in their own lives, she smiled. Knowing the fire she'd lit had spread beyond Augusta, the story of